Welcome to Book of the Day. I'm Jonathan, and this will be a continuing series where I read a book and then present what I find to be the most important things that we can take away from the book in question. And I have read Secrets of a Buccaneer-Scholar, written by James Bach and published in 2009. James Bach is a software tester and author, and James has written many books and articles about software development and testing. And this book takes on the subject of self-learning, handling complexity, and the perspectives of the self relating to learning. And I discovered James' work in my own studies to become a software tester, and I thought he seemed like a genuine guy with a passion for what he does. And that also explains why so many people in the testing community see him as a big influencer. And I will reference him with his first name in this video as it feels more appropriate since I've met him in real life. And once again I have divided the things that I've learned in his book in different areas that I think capture the book's message and lessons to us readers. So what is a Buccaneer-Scholar? And buccaneers were a kind of privateers or free sailors peculiar to the Caribbean Sea during the 17th and 18th centuries. And James uses the term buccaneers and buccaneering as a metaphor for his approach to learning. And James describes buccaneers as bold and aggressive, and they lived free and they lived by their wits. That's also how he wants to be as a thinker. And he thinks that buccaneering is a grand metaphor for the way some of us learn. And James calls it an unstoppable curiosity. And James thinks that anyone can be a buccaneer. A buccaneer scholar is anyone whose love of learning is not muzzled or shackled by any institution or authority, whose mind is driven to wander and find its own place in the world. And the only fundamental requirement is that you take responsibility for your own thinking and learning. And he thinks that the ideas are more important than training, and innovation is more important than credentials. And to James, education is not a heap of facts. Education is the you that emerges from the learning that you do. And knowledge is part of your education only if it changes you, and knowledge does not improve your education unless it changes you for the better. James himself actually quit school when he was young as he believed it was interfering with his own education, and he thought that it didn't build his confidence and independence. So he took the matter of his education in his own hands, and he said in the end it wasn't that hard to get into the software business even though he quit school. And the reason was quite simple. He knew how to do something, and he was cheap. James thinks that complexity and obscurity are just illusions. They are figments of mind shock, and what appears to be chaos is just a form of order that you do not yet understand, he says in his book. Starting is what matters, because you'll be smarter by the finish. And that's one of the benefits of being a Buccaneer scholar, according to James. With a non-stop education, you're in a position to attack opportunities to sail your way instead of steering clear with "sorry, I'm not qualified." And one way to handle perceived complexity is by the plunge in and quit heuristic that he presents in his book. The first step is to set aside any expectations about the outcome of what you're about to do. And the second step is to tackle the hardest part right now. And don't worry and don't plan, just jump in and do it. And the third step is to stop when it doesn't feel right, because it's okay to quit. And this works and makes the complexity less scary because you don't set the expectations of what you should understand or accomplish, and you can go through the steps as many times as you like. And James expands further on expectations. Expectations for oneself is what you know you can do, and aspirations are what you hope you can do. And your aspirations must always exceed your expectations. Therefore, expectations define what being healthy and normal means. That means expectations should be low. And the lower they are, the easier it is to feel healthy and normal. He shares two principles of learning in his book that I found extra useful. And the first one is the principle of peripheral wisdom. And it states that most of what we learn is a side effect of something else we were trying to do. And to appreciate all you know, don't stop with the things you studied on purpose. Look at surprising lessons that came out of it, not just what you expected to learn. And when your planned learning is frustrated or interrupted, ask what different sort of learning can I easily do in this situation, even if it wasn't my original choice. And the second principle is the principle of alternation. And it states that any one activity may lose its value the more you do it, while increasing the value of a complementary activity. By alternating what we do, we can make better progress. James talks about two contrasting metaphors of learning, and the first one is the conduit metaphor of learning, and it's an old idea. Teacher has knowledge, teacher packages knowledge into delivery trucks of words and sentences, and trucks brings packages to brain, Brain unloads trucks, stores knowledge on mental shelves, then waits for more trucks. And in terms of the conduit metaphor, knowledge is the same for everyone. It is transferred by memorization and conditioning. And the second one is the constructing metaphor of learning, and it says that maybe knowledge isn't delivered, but rather constructed actively through experiences. Constructing knowledge would require production and pursuit of many ideas. And it requires the wisdom to abandon many of them too. It requires that one appreciate one's peripheral wisdom, and the role of the conscious mind then is to gently facilitate this process. We should say yes to distractions sometimes, and this can be done with the long leash heuristic from the book. With a long leash on your mind, you encourage your mind to wander, but every 10 minutes or hour you sort of tug on the leash and get back to work. You then work for a while and let your mind wander again. And this process you can then repeat. And the essence of this process is to say yes to distractions, and this could be said to cultivate a kind of responsible distractibility. And one great quote from the book, that he calls a great secret, goes that anything I learn is a gateway to everything else I will ever know. And this is quite inspiring and would be an encouragement to sometimes let our minds wander. James talks in his book about cyclic learning, and cyclic learning means learning in broad stages, progressively filling in the gaps and resolving loose ends. And here's an example of how it could work. The first step, you encounter the material and you try to understand it. Some of it you might get and some of it you won't. You just keep going. And the next step is to review what you know and you honor your progress. And the third step is to pause and do something else. And the pause may last a few moments or a few years. And the next pass, you go through the material again. You see if any of the confusion has been spontaneously resolved. If not, you pick one of the gaps and you work on the problem. And you may use Google for this or a bunch of other ways. And the fifth step is to pause again, because cyclic learning is a constructive process, progressively sculpting your mind. And notice how this cyclic learning embodies the earlier mentioned principle of alternation. And the key to success in cyclic learning is to suspend self-judgment and tolerate confusion. James also mentions the subjects of criticism and failure. Sometimes it's hard to take criticism, yet you need it to improve. And here are some ways in which you can make criticism easier to take. Try to be the first one to know your faults. It hurts less when it's not a surprise. And know that all criticism is relative to the worldview and values of the critic. And you can also get criticism from someone you believe wants what's best for you. And James also thinks that we should celebrate our failures, because you can have your revenge on failure whenever you can turn a failure into something useful. And here are some of the ways you can do it. You can use humor, you can realize it's an invaluable lesson, and you can use it as a teaching story that you can perhaps sell to a paying customer. So to summarize, the message that I got from the book is that we can and probably should take responsibility for our own learning. You don't have to copy everyone else's way of learning. You can work with your own strengths and interest, and in that way construct a mind of knowledge like nobody else's. And this could be your own superpower. I also learned that our worst enemy is sometimes our own ego, but if we can set our expectations low and aspirations high, we can do better in being the best we can be. And remember, anything you learn is a gateway to everything else you will ever know. So that's all for today's video. If you liked it, please subscribe and hit the like button. Hopefully I will see you again in the next video.